Hey everybody, let's jump in on our last new thing for solving quadratic. Actually, it's not new. Nothing we're doing right here is new. This is just going to be extending what we've learned a little bit and looking at some different types of problems we might run into. Okay, so nothing new today. We're just going to bring all of our skills together. We're going to do some solving for quadratics. A couple things to remember before we jump in. Before we can solve, we have to set our quadratic equal to 0. We could use so that means we got to get everything on one side and a 0 on the other side. We could use just normal factoring. If that works, great. That'll help us find our solutions, also called our zeros, our roots, our x-intercepts. We could also use a quadratic formula if we're not able to factor. It's a bit slower, but also a really effective tool. Let's jump in and try these out. Any of these that you are comfortable with, you look at it and you think, yeah, I could try that. I could probably get a start on that. Pause the video and give it a try. That's the best way to do it. Okay, let's have a look at our first one here. Okay, right away I look at this and I say it's all set up properly, everything's on one side with a 0 on the other side. Let's just see if we can factor this first, because this looks like a simple trinomial. We need two numbers, they're going to multiply to 2, and they're going to add to -3. Do we have two numbers like that? Sure we do, -2 and -1. -2 and -1 multiply to 2 and add to -3. So since it's a simple trinomial, we can just set up our brackets. That's all we need to do. X here, -2, -1. If we were to multiply that back out, we'd get back where we started. So what are our solutions? Well, we'll set it equal to 0, x equals 2, and we'll set this one equal to 0, and what do we get? We get x equals 1. So those are our solutions. Nice, quick, easy. Okay, next we have one that's got a problem. We don't have everything on one side, and we've also got a bracket here we're going to need to multiply through to clean this up. So let's do that. We're going to expand the bracket first, and then we'll deal with moving everything to one side. So we still got our x squared over here. 3 times x is 3x, 3 times -2 is -6, and then we've still got that plus 5 hanging out there. Let's collect our like terms. We got x squared equals 3x plus 5x, that's 8x minus 6. Let's move everything over to the left so that we have everything equal to 0. So we'll have x squared minus 8x plus 6. We added or subtracted 8x and added 6 to both sides to move them over to the left. That equals 0. Okay, cool. So now we're ready to go. Are there two numbers that multiply to 6 and add to -8? Turns out there aren't. I'll save you the trouble. There aren't. So that means we're going to need to use our quadratic formula. Quadratic formula, we'll say, okay, a, b, and c. So our value of x is going to be -b, so that's negative of -8 is positive 8, plus or minus square root of -8 squared minus 4 times a times c over 2a. We work that out, we're going to end up with 8 plus or minus the square root of 40 all over 2. We work that out, okay, so 8 plus square root of 40, get that, and then divide it by 2, we end up with 7.16. How about 8 minus the square root of 40? Get that, and then divide it by 2, we end up with 0.838. Okay, so a little bit tricky. We got to multiply through the brackets, collect our like terms, move everything over to one side, then use our quadratic formula. What if we had something like this? Is this something you think you could try? Try multiplying through the brackets first, move everything over to one side, collect all your like terms, see if you can figure out this one. Go for it. Okay, you're back. Here we go. Let's multiply through our brackets. You'll notice I'm kind of going at lightning speed, so if this is too quick for you, feel free to stop or slow things down. 2x times x, that's 2x squared. 2x times -3, that's minus 6x. 4x times x is 4x squared. 4x times negative 1 is minus 4x. Okay, let's move everything over to one side. Let's move it over to the right side, just because then we'll have a positive term in front of our x squared. In the end, that won't, you could do it the other way, it won't actually make a difference, but I just think it comes out a little neater. So let's subtract 2x squared from both sides, and let's add 6x to both sides. That'll leave us with 0 here. And then we have 4x squared minus 2x, that's 2x squared, that's going to leave us with 2x squared. And we've got negative 4x plus 6x, that's going to leave us with 2x. Now, you could use a quadratic formula at this point, you could, but let's just see if we can factor first. Factoring is always our easiest and best option. Looks like I can factor 2x out of both of these. I take out the 2 and one of the x's, I'm left with 1x there. And I take a 2x divided 2x out of the second term, and I'm left with just a 1. So what do we have for our, so this is just common factoring, right? That's just common factoring. We always want to start there if we can. So what are our solutions? Well, one possible solution, to get an answer of 0, this one could be 0. Or to get an answer of 0, this one could be negative 1. Those are our two possible solutions that would get us an answer of 0. So those are our two solutions. How about this guy over here? Now you might right away look at this and say, aha, Mr. Roy, you just told us that common factoring is the awesome way to go, and that's true. You could common factor out a 2, and then you'd be left with x squared minus 5 equals 0. So I'm going to show you how to solve it like that in a minute, but first I want to show you how you would do it if you just wanted to use the quadratic formula. We'd say that's our a, our b is 0, there's no b term, and that's our c, is negative 10. So if I was going to do quadratic formula, I would do it like this. I would say, okay, x is equal to negative b, that's just 0, because b is 0, plus or minus square root of b squared, so that's 0 squared, minus 4, times a is 1, times c is negative 5, over 2a, so that's 2 times 1. What do we end up with? We end up with 0 plus or minus, so 0 squared, 4 times 1 times 5 is 20, but since you're subtracting a negative number, it's going to be positive 20 over 2. So we say, okay, 0 plus square root of 20, then divide it by 2. That's going to give you 2.24 as an answer. Or 0 minus square root of 20. Divide that by 2. We get negative 2.24. So same number, just the positive and negative version of it. Okay, so that's a way to do it with the quadratic formula. That works fine. It looks a little weird compared to the ones we've been doing, but that works fine. Another option, we can say, or, here's another way we could do it. We can have a look at our factored form, right, where we factored it, and we say, okay, how do we get, when it's in this factored form, how do we get a 0 here? Well, all the stuff in the bracket is going to have to equal 0, because 2, you multiply something by 2, that's not going to make it equal 0. So all the stuff in the bracket would have to be 0 to make that true. So let's say x squared minus 5 equals 0. Let's add 5 to both sides. So we get x squared equals 5. Let's take the square root of both sides. So we're going to take the square root of the left side. We're just left with x. We take the square root of 5. Now here's the thing. We could actually have two answers, because we could have negative numbers or positive numbers, right? What's the, when we actually do the square root of 4, we say what number multiplied by itself gives you 4? Well, it could be 2, and that's what your calculator will give you. But it could also be negative 2, because negative 2 squared also gives you 4. We don't actually know if it's the positive or negative. So we have to actually say plus or minus if we actually want to do this for real. Because we don't know if it's going to be a negative number squared gives you that 5, or a positive number squared gives you 5. We don't actually know. So we'll say, okay, x could be plus or minus 2.24, which is what we had for our other one, right? So there are two ways to do this. Common factor out the 2, set the thing in the bracket equal to 0 and solve, and you get two answers when you take the square root, or quadratic formula. That works great too. We're rolling along. Let's try E. We're trying to keep this one nice and short. We got a problem here. It's not 0. Let's move, let's subtract 8x from both sides. So we get 3x squared minus 8x equals 0. What can we do first? Oh, we can common factor. Let's common factor out an x. I divided an x out of both of them. Common factored out an x. Okay, so how do we get it to equal 0? Well, this could be 0. If that was 0, the whole thing would equal 0 when we multiplied them. Or if this one, 3x minus 8, if that one equaled 0, the whole thing would equal 0. So that means 3x equals 8, and let's divide both sides by 3. X equals 8 over 3. So either of those, when we sub it in, will make our equation true. Oh boy, we got a tough one here. Look at what's going on with this one, with f. What a beast. Well, of course, the first thing we want to do is we got to get rid of this squared term here. So let's actually write out what that would be. So I'm going to need to take up a lot of space here because this is going to be a big one. I'm going to go 2 x minus 1 times x minus 1, right? That's all squared means, just times itself, equals 3x plus 2. Let's multiply our x minus 1 through the brackets. So we'll keep that 2 out front for now. X times x is x squared. X times negative 1 is negative 1x. Negative 1 times x is negative 1x. Negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. So far, so good. Let's collect our like terms. Now let's multiply that 2 through the brackets. Okay, we're off to the races now, but we need all this to equal 0, right? Or it's not going to work. So let's subtract 3x from both sides and subtract 2 from both sides. Okay, so that's going to move everything over to the left. We've still got our 2x squared. Negative 4x plus 3x is going to give us negative x. Sorry, that didn't look right, and I was correct. That's actually minus, right? I got to subtract 3x from both sides, so I made a mistake there. So that's actually going to be negative 4x minus 3x. That's negative 7x. That's better. Okay. And 2 minus 2 is going to be 0, and this is going to be 0. Okay, so, oh, awesome. This simplified down a ton. What can we do from here? Let's common factor. Let's common factor out an x. So I common factored an x out of both terms. So, can I figure out what my solutions are? Yeah, how do I get a 0 on the right-hand side? Well, this one could be 0, or this one could be 0. So 2x equals 7, divide both sides by 2, x equals 7 halves. Okay, so that was a bit of lightning speed, but we've got all those skills in our skill set. Now we're just trying to put them all together. Let's finish off this quick lesson with a quadratic solving word problem. April sells specialty teddy bears at various summer festivals. That's interesting. Might actually have an aunt who makes teddy bears, and she made me one when I was a baby, and made one for my son when he was a baby, and they look kind of identical, except mine is all super beat up. Her profit for a week can be multiplied by profit for P equals negative 0.1 times n minus 150 squared plus 1050, where n is the number of teddy bears she sells during the week. How many teddy bears does she need to sell to earn 500 bucks? Ooh, okay. So this one, as soon as we see earn 500 bucks, right, we know we're going to plug that in for our profit. And then our whole thing won't equal 0, so we'll have to move that over to the other side so the whole thing ends up equaling 0. So let's do that. We got 500 for our profit equals 0.1 sorry, negative 0.1. Now this is n minus 150 squared. Let's actually write that twice because it's squared, meaning it's multiplied by itself. Okay, so I'm going to subtract that 500 from both sides. So I end up with a 0 on the left, which is what we want. And now I'm actually going to multiply through those brackets. So we'll keep our negative 0.1 out here. In the brackets, let's multiply these things. So n times n is n squared minus 150n minus 150n plus 22,500 and then we're going to go plus 550. Okay, let's keep going. Let's multiply this negative 0.1. Ooh, why aren't you red? Let's multiply this negative 0.1 through the brackets, blah, blah, blah. We could actually collect our like terms in the brackets first, so why don't we do that? That'll actually clean it up a little bit. So 150n and 150n makes 300n. Okay, now we'll multiply through the brackets. Here we go. So multiplying something by 0.1, that just divides it by 10. So we're going to have minus 30n instead of 300n. And we're going to have, it's negative term, so minus 2,250. Then we still have that plus 550 out at the end here. Let's continue to collect our like terms. So negative 2250 plus 550, we're getting negative 1700. Okay, cool. We're now actually at a point where we have a quadratic, right? Sorry, a trinomial. Trinomial. So we have it in a trinomial form, meaning we got our three terms. We got our A, our B, and our C. Now, I'm just going to give you a heads up. There's no numbers that will factor this evenly. We're going to need to use the quadratic formula. So let's use the quadratic formula to solve this. When in doubt, quadratic formula is the way to go. So we've got, to start, we've got negative B. So I'm going to end up with, just realized that my signs are off. So when I multiplied my negative number through, this should have turned positive. So that should be positive. Okay, cool. Now we're rolling. So negative B is going to be negative 30 plus or minus the square root of 30 squared minus 4 times A times C. All of that over 2 times A. Oh, this is a messy monster. Some calculator work is what we need now. Let's plug that into our calculator, see what we get. We're going to have negative 30 plus or minus. What's it going to be in the brackets? It's going to end up as 220. Try that to make sure you can get there, right? We have 30 squared, and then we're subtracting 4 times negative 0.1 times negative 1700. So the negative 0.1, negative 1700, the negatives will cancel out, meaning we're subtracting all of that stuff. So you should get 220. Try that out. Make sure you can. And on the bottom, we have negative 0.2. 2 times negative 0.1. Okay, we worked that out. We're going to end up with x values of 75.8 or 224.1. So let's remind ourselves what, it's called n here. Sorry, I was doing n and then I switched to x for some reason. Let's fix that, shall we? There we go. Let's keep our terms the same. So we'll go n, 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 and n. That's better. So what was n? N is the number of teddy bears she sells. So how many does she need to sell to earn 500? So, like, let's assume this is, because you can't sell like point 0.8 of a teddy bear. So let's assume at least, we're talking at least 500, right? What's our range that's going to earn us at least 500? So we'll say, therefore, um, she needs to sell between 76 and 224 bears to earn at least 500 bucks. And if she sells in between those two numbers, she's going to earn more. Her maximum is somewhere in between those. Actually, it's like equal in between those. It's halfway in between those numbers that we calculated. But we know to earn at least 500 bucks, she's got to earn between 76 and 224. There's no way to actually earn 500 bucks exactly because you can't sell 0.8 of a teddy bear or zero point 0.1 of a teddy bear. At least I don't know anyone who would want to buy 0.8 of a teddy bear. Teddy bear missing an arm, I guess, or a head, something like that. Not so popular. So we have to kind of round off and use our common sense on something like this, right? Okay, so this was stuff you already knew, but this was it in a trickier form. This is as tricky as it's going to get, solving quadratics. Now that you've done this, if you're okay with this, you can do anything with solving quadratics. Good luck. Time for some practice.